Right now, I'm going to show you how to nature journal on a remote cliff in Costa Rica. All right, step number one, safety first. All right, I don't see a landscape though that I want to paint right now to get the overall setting. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna start with more of a collection. So if you've seen my previous video where I talk about how to do a nature journal collection, it's one of the basic nature journaling techniques where you decide on a certain topic and then you like a category and then you nature journal multiple things within that category. It could be basically a list. It's almost a list, and add in some little sketches of things, some descriptions, diagrams, and you have a nature journal collection. So for example, one thing that I could do here would just be plants. I could do plants that are growing on this cliff. So here's an orchid, there's a bromeliad up there and some other stuff. I could do things that are growing on this cliff. I could look for bugs or other animals on this cliff. I could also do a curiosity wander, but I think I'm just gonna start with a collection and I'm gonna start nature journaling some of the plants that I see here. I'm gonna put my metadata down here first. There you can see my metadata. I got my first plant done. When nature journaling on a cliff, it is really important to always lean towards the cliff and away from the edge, away from the drop. So for example, right here, I'm leaning into this rock and leaning against it and positioning my feet in a way that I'm always leaning towards the rock and away from the edge. Another thing is to be really careful when using your binoculars, because using binoculars can disrupt or sort of mess with your sense of balance. So always have your close focus binoculars with you when you're nature journaling, but when you're nature journaling on a cliff, be careful when you use them, or if you're unsure of your balance, don't use them at all. So I was just nature journaling this orchid right here. I see that it's growing on a rock, and in my journal I wrote that it's growing on a rock. Now I'm also noticing that it's growing on a tree, so I'm gonna add that information to my journal, and then I think I'm going to do this plant next. All right, you probably already know from my other videos that I think it's really important for everything in your nature journal kit to be one-handable if possible. So for example, I can use one hand to manipulate my binoculars, one hand to focus them, and even one hand to open up these things. It's very important because I might, in my other hand, have my nature journal, for example. When you are nature journaling on a cliff, this is more important than ever because you want to always have one free hand. If one hand is on your binoculars and the other hand is on your nature journal, then you don't have a hand to grab onto anything near you. There's nothing for you to be able to grab on with. So more reason for your nature journal kit to be one-handable. All right, the next plant that I'm gonna add to my collection is right here. It's a tree, and it's a little bit easier of a spot, more comfortable of a spot where I can actually sit down. So if your legs are getting tired the whole time, sitting down is a good way to save some of that energy. So be intentional about how you break up your time, and if you can get into a more comfortable position every once in a while to save some energy, then try doing that. I don't know if this vine is dependable to hang on. It looks like a rotten vine, so I don't think I'm going to put any weight on that. A lot of this rock is really crumbly as well. This type of rock is very crumbly, so it's a little bit sketchy what you can grab onto. And if you're in the tropics like I am, always be aware that there could be snakes, so check everywhere before you sit down. There's also a lot of biting ants. If you're gonna do watercolor on a cliff, keep it simple and do light washes so that you don't have your page needing to dry for a long time. I also don't recommend setting your nature journal on your lap the way I was. It would be a disaster if it fell and rolled down into the ocean on your trip. If you have an adjustable strap on your nature journaling bag, one thing you can do is tighten it up quite a bit, and that will make you a little bit more stable while you're balancing on a sketchy cliff. One other thing is your water bottle. Your heavy water bottle could be a liability. My nature journal bag is really good at holding this specific type of water bottle. However, sometimes those external water bottle pockets are not enough to hold that bottle in, and it could fall down the cliff. So make sure all of your supplies are really tightly connected to your person. And the more important the supply and the less replaceable, such as your journal itself, then the more it should be strapped and protected. So I have 3 plants in my collection so far, nature journaling on this cliff, and I'm starting to get a little bit tired, but I still have a bunch more plants to look at, and at least a landscape eco or something else to add to this nature journal page. So one thing you can always do, if you're running out of energy, is consume some type of sugary thing. I never used to do this before, but having a beverage or a candy can be really useful. Just also one thing to, oh shoot, make sure you have a way to open your beverage. Unfortunately, I don't have any of my usual Guayaki classic gold yerba mate that I usually drink, so the closest thing that I could find here is a Coca-Cola. This is not an advertisement for Coca-Cola. This is going to help me nature journal more though, so that's what counts. I'm trying to find a place to stand here. So I have 8 plants on here in this collection, and I think that's probably good enough. Now I'm going to do a landscapito. Alright, so now I'm going to do the landscapito part, and I'm going to be looking at the area out there at the edge of the cliff. I'm going to be looking at that and sort of these trees coming over here. There's a strangler fig. Unfortunately, I can't get all the cool stuff happening on that side. It's going to be hard enough to fit in what I see going on there.
So these days, I always use my gray Fudoyaku pen to draw in the basic composition and also to even block in some of the values when I do watercolor painting. And this pen is super good. It will end up sort of fading away when you add the watercolor later, which I find leaves a very subtle effect compared to other drawing tools that you can use before watercolor. And it also has the black pen on one side, and the gray works really well for text. So I'm just getting in the basics of my landscape using that Fudoyaku pen. Now I'm getting out my watercolor kit, and as usual, I start with the lightest values. In this case, that's going to be the sky, it's going to be parts of the ocean, and it's also going to be even some parts of the vegetation and rocks.
When you're nature journaling on a cliff, at some point you might notice yourself holding in a pee or holding in your breath or just getting kind of tired in your legs. I'm in the middle of a watercolor painting. A lot of times when I'm doing watercolor, I get all tensed up. Certain parts of it you have to do fast, but there are times where you can take a break. So it's really good to take a little break, stretch your legs a little bit, and just go to the bathroom, drink some water, and just kind of relax for a little bit if you notice yourself tensing up in that way. Because this is not the kind of place where you want to be rushing things. Alright, I got the ants out of my clothing and took a little breather, and I'm back to finish this watercolor landscape on the cliff. Let the watercolor dry a little bit in the sun. Good thing I use all light, fast colors, because there are colors that with the sun will fade. Let's see, where's my water brush? Here we go. Get everything out here.
Up until this point, I basically have a single wash down. I have already created some of the value differences. You can see the dark areas on the rocks, but now I am going back and jumping around on the painting, adding and correcting values in places where they don't quite match up. It's really important to keep looking at your subject during this stage and trying to get those value relationships correct before you worry about the colors. The color in the big scheme is less important than the value relationships. So just check, are the rocks darker than the ocean? Is the ocean darker than the sky? Is the foliage equally dark in all places? Is some of the foliage darker than the ocean? And get all of that right. It's not realistic to use masking fluid or masking tape in the field. However, there are some white options, opaque white options, that I have found useful. This jumbo correction pin is made for using as whiteout, but it works pretty well when you have to paint in white water in the ocean or clouds in a blue sky. Obviously, being able to reserve your whites is always the best option, and that way the paper white shines through, which is the best white to have in your watercolor painting, but that's not always possible, and it takes a lot of planning and a lot of practice to be able to reserve the whites like that. Painting in your highlights and your whites later is much easier, so having a tool like this jumbo correction pin or the Uniball Signo is really good. Check out the link to buy one for yourself.
Alright, I'm feeling pretty good about this session, nature journaling on this cliff. I finished my landscapito, probably one of the more technical locations and technical paintings for a landscapito I've done in a while. I got 8 plants that were growing on the cliff, a little bit of an entry here, room for some more title information, and I can also add some more written description down here at the bottom. Starting to feel a little bit tired, definitely a challenging location, so when you're nature journaling on a cliff, whether that's in Costa Rica or somewhere else, stop before you're done and reward yourself, because you just burned a lot of calories. So go eat an ice cream sundae or some chocolate or some pie or whatever. I'm probably going to go eat a hamburger at the hotel where I am staying. All right, tune in next time for the Nature Journal Show.